We'd also encourage you, if you are comfortable doing so, to go ahead and share your video so that we can get a little bit closer to that in-person experience. We are all quite familiar with sharing our videos on Zoom and all the other platforms at this point, I know. Great to see so many faces. All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Any other ground rules, Sheila or Michelle, that I'm missing? All right. Welcome everybody to the ABGC annual business meeting. This is a first for us to not be doing this in person at the annual conference at NSGC. We had actually planned to do this pre-COVID, but it actually worked out nicely to get to see everybody without being together at the meeting. So we're gonna do what we normally do at this meeting and walk through some of our accomplishments from 2020, give a financial overview for ABGC, talk about passing rates and performance on the certification exam, introduce our 2021 board of directors, and then give you a sense of where we're headed next. I also did want to make sure that we allowed time for questions. So we've got that toward the end, and I've already had a few questions come in as well. So starting off with those key accomplishments for 2020, I think you all can imagine the level of disruption from the pandemic, having lived through it yourselves. And just wanted to highlight a few things there. One of which was, I think you all are familiar that in working with PSI, who's our exam partner, and the accrediting body, NCCA, we offered the August administration of the exam by live remote proctoring and at testing centers as well. And that was a significant undertaking both for staff for ABGC, for PSI as well, with the goal really of trying to make sure that we were being safe, that we're maintaining access to the exam in August. When we started discussing it, it was March, and it was really uncertain at that point what the situation would be at the time. So that was a major undertaking there. And although I think it's clear it didn't go off without a hitch, just pulling it together in that amount of time was, I think, a real testament to all the key players who managed to pull it off. I'd also note that the passing rate remains stable regardless of the format in which we administer the exam. We'll dig into that a little bit further in a few minutes, but that was one early sign of encouragement there. We'll also talk a little bit about the experience of that August administration, what went right, what went wrong, and plans for next time around. So there was a need to do some communication about some of the issues that were occurring, both with the remote proctoring and some of the in-person testing centers as well. And so we'll talk about that too. In other accomplishments, ABGC has been working hard this year to communicate openly with diplomates and candidates and other stakeholders. We have been active on Twitter, both with sharing pandemic-related information and resources, as well as information around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And particular to that, in June, hosted a hashtag ABGC Listens chat, and heard from diplomates, candidates, others in the field about some opportunities for ABGC to continue to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Made some specific commitments as a board, including with implicit bias training, with reviewing the process for certification and the eligibility criteria for certification, committing to engaging a third-party organization to evaluate the exam and the items in the exam for implicit bias. And again, all of that is effort that we've tried to communicate clearly to our various stakeholders, both in Twitter and in other resources as well. And I think one of the things that's been clear since I've been on the board for ABGC is that there's a lot of room for improvement there and a lot of room for clearing up some misperceptions about what the exam is and is not and how it's developed. So we continue to work on some resources related to making the inner workings of the board and our processes more transparent and clear to everybody who engages with us. Financially, this is a breakdown from 2019. Just a reminder, these are the most recent complete data that we have. We'll have 2020 data at this time next year. This gives you a sense of where spending is, or I'm sorry, where revenue is for the board, with exam fees on the upper right making up about 1/3 of our revenue, certification maintenance fees making up roughly 1/3 there toward the bottom middle, investment income at about 1/4, and then some miscellaneous income there as well. So revenue for 2019 of just over $1 million. Expenses, again, some fairly large buckets there for expenses. Certification exam and our contract with PSI is in the upper right at about 20%. Administration costs, as you work your way around clockwise from there, related to the sort of keeping the lights on thing with operating business expenses. Management services for Kellen, our management partner, are there toward the middle at the bottom of a little over 1/4. Expenses for the board itself and board meetings, and then strategic initiatives. So those are things like marketing and communications, continuing competence task force, a leadership academy, and so forth. So you can see toward the lower left, the total expense there is about $937,000. So math wizards will see that that's less than the revenues. And another picture of the financial state of the board here, comparing 2019 to 2018 with 2019 in blue. The total assets, investments, unrestricted net assets, all favorable for 2019 compared to 2018. Not significant changes there, but improvements from 2 years ago to last year in all 3 categories there. I would also say that we don't anticipate any significant changes in either revenue or expenses for 2020. We'll know more, of course, but even in the midst of the pandemic, we're not forecasting any significant either challenges there or a significant increase in income. Moving on to certification data. So just a note here, I imagine most folks are familiar, but the exam bulletin, which lays out criteria for taking the exam and the way in which it is administered, is posted online at abgc.net. The application for the exam requires for new applicants a $900 fee, for re-applicants an $800 fee. And in 2020, we have tested in February and August and are planning 2 administrations next year in 2021 as well. In terms of number of candidates for the exam in 2020 across those 2 administrations in February and August, we had a total of 508. Most of those, 84% were first-time exam takers. Another 15% were repeat exam takers. And then 5 brave souls who decided to recertify by taking the exam. So kudos to them for their courage in going through the exam process again for recertification. Just to give a sense of context here, this is a fairly typical breakdown from year to year in terms of rates of first-time test takers, repeat, and sort of recertifying by exam. We are seeing kind of over the past several years, of course, increases in the overall numbers of exam candidates as the number of programs increases. This is a bit of a busy slide here. So just to give you a frame of reference, this is the passing rate year by year from 2012 to 2020, with the blue bars being first time passing rate and the orange being overall. So in each administration, this has been pretty routine across the years. The passing rate tends to be a little bit higher in first-time exam takers compared to repeat test takers. So you'll see that the orange bars for the overall pass rate that include those repeat test takers are a little bit lower than the blue bars all the way across. The other thing to note here for 2020 here at the far right is that the first-time pass rate of 83%, the overall pass rate of 81% are pretty similar to previous administrations. Quite similar to 2019 and 2018. You can see some higher passing rates a few years ago, some lower passing rates a few years before that. So we're really pretty similar to what we've seen in previous administrations. I would also note that when we looked administration cycle by cycle, so in August versus previous administration cycles, as you can imagine, there was a lot of concern about taking the exam in the midst of a pandemic with first-time candidates who had to complete their training programs, often remotely, and study and perhaps join a new job in the midst of all that uncertainty. So we were encouraged that we did not see a significantly different passing rate in the August administration compared with the previous 9 administrations. So I think that's kudos to all those first-time test takers who really persevered. Kudos to those repeat test takers who persevered through all that related uncertainty with the pandemic. I think it has been an exceedingly difficult time to enter the profession and to go through this process. We recognize that and are pleased that everyone has really been able to persevere in spite of that. We also wanted to dig a little bit more into the August administration and the different methods of administering the exam. So we looked at live remote proctoring and at those who took the exam in test centers, and you can see the numbers there for which candidates chose which method. With just over 100 choosing live remote proctoring, and then nearly 250 choosing to take the exam in a testing center. Very similar passing rates in those two methods, no significant difference between the two. These rates do include those who were both first-time test takers and repeat test takers. It looks like the first-time test takers who took their exam by live remote proctoring had an even slightly higher passing rate, as one might imagine, consistent with previous administrations. So we had some wonder about whether that live remote proctoring and its potential for technical difficulties and other challenges that may have been outside of candidates' control would lead to differential rates in passing. We haven't seen that in the data. We'll continue to keep an eye on that going forward, but so far, encouraging to not see a significant difference in passing rate by those two methods of administration. And then you can see the overall passing rate for August was 86%. So, going back to the year by year, you'll note that that's even a little bit higher than the overall passing rate here for 2020 of 81%. So the February administration had a little bit lower passing rate overall than the most recent August administration, which has been really similar to overall rates in previous years. So I think that doesn't tell us that this wasn't a challenging time or that people didn't have difficulty in doing it. I think it tells us that people really buckled down and managed to make it through the uncertainty of the time and all the disruption from the pandemic. So we're encouraged by that and looking forward to continuing to improve on that process going forward. Okay, recognizing that those two sections there, financial and certification exam rates, probably have generated some questions. We will definitely touch on those questions as we wrap up. But wanted to introduce our 2021 and 22 Board of Directors. So our officers for 2021, incoming president is Kristen Paulson Nunez. Kristen, would you like to wave to everybody? There's Kristen waving if you happen to be in her frame of however many people fit on your Zoom screen. We also have as president-elect in 2021, Catherine Fine, and Secretary-Treasurer Bronson Riley. Excited about the leadership among those three, looking forward to each of them communicating to you all about what they're excited about for 2021, what initiatives they'd like to move forward, and where that they see the board continuing to grow. We also have our board of directors here. Sarah Noblin and Kate Wilson are moving into their second year on the board in 2021. And we're excited to have as our new board members for 2021, for our directors at large, Barb Harrison and Angela Trepanier. Here, it's going to be a real asset to have a wealth of experience in the field and bring some wonderful perspectives to the board. And I'm thrilled that they've agreed to join us and looking forward to where they can take the board in the years ahead. We also will be selecting a new public member for the board. Public members for ABGC serve 2 years, whereas board members serve 4 years. So our current member is at the end of his 2-year period. And so we are looking for a new public member to join us as well, and have several excellent candidates there that we are vetting right now. So welcome, Barb and Angela, and excited about the composition of the board going forward. There we have it all together on the same screen. And then rolling off this year, a bit awkward to thank myself, but really want to thank Ana Morales for her leadership. She was president of ABGC last year in 2019. It was wonderful to learn from her in the process, and it's been a real joy to serve on the board with her. It's been a treat to work with everyone else that we've had the benefit of working with, and know that the board is in excellent hands going forward, and just I am thankful to have had the opportunity to work with all the wonderful volunteers for ABGC, which is really what drives any success that it has.
Well, I will take a minute to thank Adam for his calm and steady leadership this year, which has been most welcome in this crazy year we've had. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. So let's look ahead. This is some of the fun stuff. So you know, in spite of what is the most unusual year of probably most of us can recall, we've still managed to move several important initiatives forward. So we wanted to tell you about that because we're excited about it, and we wanted to engage you in that process because we're going to need some help to move some of these initiatives forward. So as I said earlier, it's imperative that we continue to increase our communication with our diplomates and with candidates. And we have a marketing communications committee. We have a contract with a communications experts at Kellen, which is the management company that we work with. And that's been a real boon for us in being able to more clearly communicate what it is that ABGC does and learn from our diplomates and candidates about what we can do better. We remain committed to fostering diversity and inclusion in the profession at large. That means pursuing several different initiatives at once, some with shorter time frames, some with longer, including that request for proposals for a consultant to evaluate exam items for implicit bias, examining the way in which we allow people to take the exam, looking at the recertification process, and working with our other organizations in the profession to see where we can put our resources together to really think about that end-to-end journey that individuals might take from the very moment that they hear about genetic counseling all the way to the moment when they get that certificate saying that they are a certified genetic counselor and beyond, to when it's time for them to go through the recertification process. In fact, that recertification process is something that we've had a task force that's been working for the last couple of years on evaluating and reimagining. So it's clear from the state of both our field and from other health professions that it is imperative for us to continue to be nimble in how we assess competence. And that's both because, as you all know, we have a rapidly changing field, but it's also because we have a duty to our patients and communities to make sure that the certified genetic counselors that are taking care of them are continuing to demonstrate that competence. So we are looking forward in 2021 to getting guidance from that task force on what continuing competence might look like in the future. You'll notice the change from recertification to continuing competence to highlight that this is an activity that's intended to be broader. It's not simply a process where we are collecting CEUs to recertify, but thinking about what it is that we really want to put in place to feel confident that that competence is continuing and that there's really an opportunity for growth throughout careers that can be recognized by this process. So I'm excited to see what those recommendations are. We're also looking forward to engaging with all of you on how we might enact those recommendations. I foresee this being a process that needs that sort of engagement to really arrive at an approach that works for everyone. One of the other things we've been talking about a lot as a board, particularly over the last several months, is access to the examination. So sometimes that means that we talk about how frequently we offer the exam. More recently, we've been talking about how many attempts one might have at passing the exam, and have gotten good agreement among the board on eliminating a limit on number of attempts for the exam. Now, have yet to work out the details of that. So I think it's premature to communicate exactly what that means, but we're hopeful that that'll improve access to the examination. I would also anticipate that we'll be offering live remote proctoring for the February administration of the exam. It's not certain yet that we will be able to. That's something that the NCCA, the accrediting body, has to agree to. But presumably, we will be in a similar, if not more limited state then in terms of COVID. So we're anticipating needing to maintain that access for individuals who don't feel safe taking the exam in person. Related to that administration and to our partner at PSI, it was clear in the August administration that customer service was not what it should have been. There were sometimes long wait times. There were candidates who went to testing centers that were not open when they were expected to be open. These were a minority of the experiences as we understand it, but it was still not the level of service that we have come to expect from PSI. We've been very clear with PSI about that and about our wishes to make changes there. We have a spectrum of options here up to and including finding a different partner that we can administer the exam through. That is, as you can imagine, quite a process to get there. We have not entered that process at this point. Rather, we're trying to work carefully with PSI to look for the opportunities to be clear with communication to individuals who are taking exam by live remote proctoring, to be fully staffed in terms of customer service and fielding any issues that come in, technical issues or otherwise, dropping testing centers that PSI doesn't have certainty that they have clear enough communication with, For example, some of the issue with the testing centers not being open was because they were contracted centers that PSI doesn't quote unquote own. And so sometimes those are not as communicative as one would hope. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to tighten up the administration for February. And we're now having regular conversations with PSI and are certain that they understand the seriousness of the need to make those changes. You know, as you all know, the exam is the primary product of ABGC, and having a trustworthy, valid, rigorous exam is our most important calling card. So it's of fundamental importance to make sure that that process is an open and reliable one. Other access to the exam. So again, with that continuing competence work, we're thinking about how we can use that in the recertification frame to influence what we might develop for the original certification. So more to come there, but you know, the board is thinking creatively and strategically about how we can continue to push the envelope and make sure that content on exams is as up to date as possible. Along those lines, we are in the middle of a strategic planning process that we had hoped to conduct in person, but COVID. So we have been conducting that over the last couple of months with several really active and engaged Zoom meetings, each lasting multiple hours, and have one more such meeting this weekend. And I think it'll be a strategic plan that is exciting, that pushes us to be creative about how we think about certification, that pushes us to really prioritize a profession that has a diversity of viewpoints and experiences and in ways that I don't think we've been explicit about before. So I'm excited about what's developing as a strategic plan and the goals and objectives there, and looking forward to sharing with all of you. So with that in mind, what I would ask is that that you keep the lines of communication open. We would love to continue to hear your thoughts and your feedback, to hear your questions about what we can do better or make clearer. There are several ways to become engaged in ABGC, including the practice analysis coming out in 2021 to 2022. So that's the beginning of what turns into an exam, with the practice analysis being the process by which we determine what the key areas are where diplomates are working. So what is an activity that you spend time on? How much of your time do you spend on that activity? How important is it to your position? And that's what turns into the document called the detailed content outline. So laying out the topics that serve as the backbone for the items that we write about for the exam. So participating in that practice analysis survey is one way to influence what ends up on the exam. There are several other ways too, including volunteering for ABGC's committees. You'll see soon an email call for volunteer opportunities, serving on the certification exam committee, writing items. Those are things that over the coming year will be opportunities to become engaged in the process. And again, it's of utmost importance that we engage as much diversity as possible in these activities to make sure that the exam and the other activities of ABGC represent broadly our profession and seek to push that. So please continue to stay in touch with us. There are lots of ways to do that. And it really is, I know this is a trite, but it really is important for us to hear from you to make sure that we're on track with the engagement and with where the board is headed. With that, we can turn to questions. And So we've got a few that came in beforehand, and so I will walk through these, and then we can get to the ones that have come in the chat in the interim.
So
the first, yeah, go ahead.
Adam, just if you have questions, please put it in the public chat to everyone, so that those that we are unable to get to before the session ends will be recorded, and then we can pull those and do a published document after that, after the presentation.
Great, thanks. Okay, so first one that came in was an update on the status of the partnership with PSI. As I mentioned, that partnership persists, but with some pretty pointed conversations about some improvements that we would like to see. It is imperative for us to have a testing company like PSI to work with to make sure that our exam meets the standards of NCCA as the accrediting body. So for the time being, our approach has been to work closely with PSI to make improvements for the next administration, so that that can be a more seamless experience for candidates. Question about, can you help us understand how to think about future administration of the exam if the pandemic continues into summer 2021? What will be the same? What will be different? We anticipate February being pretty similar to August in terms of having the two modalities for taking the exam, both in person and by live remote proctoring. One of the things that we have considered as a board is whether to extend the window for that administration to allow for the possibility of disruption or fewer testing sites being open and so forth. Have not made any final decisions there, but it is something that, that the board considers. Into August with the administration, presuming a continued pandemic into then, we recognize that there may then be an effect on when graduation occurs and what that process looks like. So I think, again, the board has spent over the last year some of each meeting talking about pandemic response and deadlines and what to alter, and I foresee that continuing in the months ahead. I think February will be fairly similar. August, it's a little harder to project, but the board is talking frequently about what we might need to alter to try to meet candidates where they are, and in terms of timelines that have been shifted for programs and so forth. And the next question is about whether there will be more communication provided to candidates around the live remote proctoring and how to troubleshoot problems. Absolutely. I think that's a clear area where we know that we need to do more ahead of time to be really clear about how that process works, send mock-ups of what screens will look like, and just give a lot more detailed experience there. We've even heard some suggestions of having mock live remote proctoring, and that's an interesting idea to look into. So I think that's one of the key areas of discussion that we've had with PSI about how we can improve that communication. I anticipate that being clear in February and recognize the need for that. Next question is about whether there will be an extension for the 2020 recertification deadline. That's another topic we've discussed quite a bit with the board. We have not made a decision to extend the recertification deadline for 2020, people who are recertifying in 2020, primarily because of the wealth of online certification activities or CEU activities. ACNG, NSGC, and others have provided lots of activities for that, but we recognize that may still be a problem. So I would say stay tuned on that. We are still discussing that as a board, but have not made any final decisions there. Last question that came in ahead of time was about ABGC's plans to assess the correlation of performance on the board exam and race. It's a topic that we've been talking about for well over a year now at the board level, and one that we're keenly interested in looking at as a board level as well. There are several ways in which we could do that. There are some methodological considerations for how to do that and to have enough data to make a meaningful analysis there. It might behoove us to work closely with some of our genetic counseling partners like programs or AGCPD to do that sort of work so that we can get at what I think is the underlying question here of whether there are differences in performance on the board by race or other demographic characteristics. So that is of interest, and so we're now working on what approach makes the most sense there, both in terms of methodology and in terms of partnerships. With that brings us to the end of the questions that we received ahead of time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so that I can see the chat. All right, I can see a couple questions here in the chat. So we've got a question here about commenting on how the board is balancing the need to increase exam access against the needs to protect the public, particularly about the elimination of the limit on the number of attempts, which is a super question. And that's really where the board discussion has been till now, is how do we try to strike those two goals, especially when they're in some tension with each other. So the way in which we're thinking about that has to do with how we set time limits on active candidate status and for how long someone might have it, whether someone might be able to regain it after a certain point. We're trying to acknowledge that life twists and turns and winds, and that sometimes people who have completed training programs spend time out of the profession and come back to it. And we want to acknowledge that there are multiple ways to get back into the profession. And so if we can do that in a way that does balance our duty to protect the public there, then I think that's the goal that we're shooting for. So those are the details that we're talking about at the board level now, yet to be determined, but those are exactly the two pieces that are somewhat in tension that we're trying to strike. Others, Sheila or others, would you say more there?
I wouldn't, I mean, I think you addressed the question as to what we know so far, and that the board does continue to discuss the active candidate status in particular, and also how that interacts with licensure as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, and as the next question raises, since certification is tied to licensure in so many states, then it's incumbent upon us to work closely with NSGC and with others who are in that licensure process, so that we're not out of step with those states with any changes that we do make. So wouldn't enter into this without more thorough conversations there. So I think those are there are a lot of key stakeholders here when thinking about certification and any changes to the process. Same with recertification. So that licensure really is a key consideration there. So
yeah, I would just add to that, the continuing competency task force is definitely considering the licensure components as well, as they look at what a program might look like moving forward.
Thanks, Sheila. So keeping an eye on the chat here, there's a question about virtual interviews, programs, and cases, and whether we're assessing those. And wondering whether there's any ongoing research on how making genetic counseling training virtual is impacting candidates. We haven't looked at that. I know from talking to Janet Williams and Donna Lane that ACGC is thinking carefully about virtual training and how that occurs and what that might mean for standards there. So that might be an interesting question to tackle in partnership with ACGC. Another question about juxtaposing the consideration about the twists and turns of life against the board's previous decision not to allow a quote unquote pause button on the recertification timeline. So I think that one of the things that we've heard as we've talked to individuals who entered the field, those who've completed programs but haven't passed the board exam or haven't sat for the board exam, is that there's a wish for a recognition that—
Sorry to bother you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I go, what was that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, good. So I go into that link, the manual. Here, I'm going to show you my screen. Oh my God. Is that weird about Jordan? I thought that was weird.
So I think we have someone who is having another conversation. So this is, in fact, that now turns us into a normal Zoom meeting. Thank you for that normalcy. We have now had side conversation enter a Zoom meeting. So check that box, everybody. If you're playing Zoom bingo at home, you can put a circle in that square. So anyway, back to the question about consideration of, how do we kind of acknowledge the possibility that sometimes life gets in the way, if you will, with the previous decisions about kind of not putting a pause. I do think that's where that active candidate status comes into play, and where we recognize that has implications for licensure, and there's a real needle to thread there to find the right balance. But I think it's become clear that acknowledging that we want to give people every opportunity to get into the profession if they have demonstrated the training, if they have demonstrated that they're up to speed on current practice, then I think that's important. All right. Other questions?
Guys aren't usually shy. Are there any other questions?
So this one's more of a comment than a question, but we should definitely acknowledge it. So assume ABGC understands and shares the same goals, but if we don't have demographic data identifiers, even if optional or incomplete, it is much harder to assess bias in the examination. And it appears that the discussion is related to how incomplete the data can be and still be statistically meaningful. So I think, we had a discussion at our September board meeting about that very point, and clear agreement at the board level on that this is information that we would like to have. Bias is something that can be considered at the exam level. It's also something that when you talk to psychometricians, they really look at the item level and whether items perform differentially based on factors beyond someone's competence, which is what you're trying to assess. So as I said, it's important to work with others who already have those data to take a look at those questions. All right, a few other questions have come in. Question about the current status of considering out of US candidates. So we have a process for recognizing individuals who have been certified by other international genetic counseling bodies. We have gone through that process with the human genetics group in Australasia. And so that there's some ability for those individuals to sit for the board exam. And so there is a process for other entities to do that as well. Sheila, anything that you would add there?
We have not had any other international bodies apply to us in recent or indicate interest. The last I had contact with the European board, they were undergoing some changes or revision of their accreditation program review requirements. And so I would anticipate some communication following that, but I have I've not heard of any other interest from any other international body. HDSA is approved though, and we are currently working on building out the capacity for international folks to apply online, and that should be available by the end of the year.
All right, question about the current total of board certified genetic counselors. I don't know the exact number because I haven't done the math since August, but it's in the neighborhood of 5,500.
Yeah, Candace just ran that number for me because I saw it and I chatted her privately. It's 5,531.
Okay.
Yay.
Hooray. So as you may recall, this time last year, we were celebrating 5,000 certified genetic counselors and had a campaign to celebrate that. So we have added nearly 10% in that year. So well done. We continue to grow. Other questions? If you're feeling shy and don't want to put something in the public chat and want to message us later, please do. If you think of something later, which is what normally happens to me, please send us a message. We will gather any more that come in and send out a response.
You just send that to my attention, SONeil@abgc.net.
Thanks, Sheila.
Oh,
Question now about how many programs there are, and I'm glad that Janet is with us. So I know that last year there was celebration of the 50th program, but I don't know the exact number now.
Yeah, I think we're at 52, but you know, we're always in the process or in the midst of reviewing candidacy applications and new program accreditations. So I think that's where we're at right now. We swapped out in the process Stanislaus program, and so in essence lost one and then brought in more. So, but the programs are listed on our website. I'm sorry, I didn't go to the website. I had.
So note about that number, it might well be 54, at least online it is. And then a very appropriate Happy Genetic Counselor Awareness Day this Thursday. So pleased to be talking to everybody a couple days ahead of that. We have another program related question. We're probably not the best entity to answer that question at ABGC. That would be either our partners in AGCPD. That's probably the best group to come up with that number.
And Laura can attest, but the AGCPD does put their summary statistics from each match program on their website. I don't know if 2020 is on there yet, but I know that's where I find them.
Do you mind if I break in? Right now it's just about 500. I believe it was 494 this last match cycle, and there have been at least 2 new programs added since that. So it will be more next year, I believe. We are currently in the process of a major overhaul of our website, which is why things are lagging, but we are very close to the end of that process, and so things will be up soon. Thanks.
And for those of you who are not aware, thanks, Laura. Laura Conway is the current president of AGCPD.
So I have a question, Adam. I think I heard you allude to the fact that the February test takers tend to have slightly lower pass rates than the August test takers. Is that directly related to the fact that the February test takers may have more second time around individuals, or is that across all test takers?
That's a great question. So that was the case this year. I haven't looked at the data year to year to see whether that's held up over the years.
The February administration is typically always the smaller administration. I think this year we had even smaller numbers than past years. And so, you know, the pass rate is going to vary with the smaller numbers if you have more people who are, the number of repeats is about, the percentage wise is about the same for total test takers in that February administration.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you to consider taking a look at that. It's a question that often comes up in terms of individuals who have to take the August exam for state licensure. And I think it's an important statistic for us to be aware of.
Great. Thanks, Janet. We can definitely look at that. Other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining today. I want to recognize the phenomenal board members. It has been such a pleasure to work with. Recognize our partners at Kellen with Sheila. Michelle Cunningham has joined us. Candace Miller, who fielded untold questions during the last administration. It's been quite a year, but it's been a wonderful team to work with. So I'm excited about the year ahead and the new board starting in January, and have been just thrilled and privileged to be able to serve in this role. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I think we can end it and we can, you know, circle back around. I can do a quick Zoom meeting if you want.
You know, I just wanted to say what a great job that was. That was, look, you made it right on time. All the questions. That, again, not being too close to it, that was really impressive. Very well done.
Well, that's...
I can end the meeting now. I will go ahead and do so. Thanks, you guys. Great job.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to catch you up now, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.